Hello, sweet friend. My name is Maike, and in this video, I would like to chat with you about paper. I got in the mood to try some new to me papers, and so I picked up some Yu-Sari paper, some View Corona, and then two papers by Wearingeul. And I didn't even realize Wearingeul made papers. I thought they were only doing inks and ink swatching cards, but yeah, you can buy paper from them. So this one really piqued my interest because this is called their impression drawing book, and the description said that this is great for fountain pen inks and watercolor. So yeah, that's sounding like my kind of paper. And then I also picked up the Reservoir paper by Wearingeul. And in order to compare all of these, I made some nifty little sheets and just quickly showing you what I tested for, because that's what I want my paper to be able to handle, was of course normal writing with fountain pen, then some ink swatching, which I don't necessarily need a new ink swatching book, but I did want to see how it handled larger amounts of ink, because I like to draw with my Kakimori dip nib or do even larger areas with fountain pen inks. So yeah, I just wanted a general sense of how much ink can it handle. Then I wanted to see how black ink shows up, like crisp and deep it gets, and this is also helpful to see how the line widths compare and if they stay consistent. Then we have waterproof ink with watercolor, and then here I tested a sailor ink that I diluted with water to almost create like a watercolor effect, and it was really interesting to see how this dried, and there's quite some differences, as we'll see. And then I tested some stamps with different stamp pads and some Tombow markers, as well as colored pencils. So that's sort of the general lay of the land, but now let's look at these closer. Oh, and because I figured I was already creating these sheets, why not create some for my beloved Midori paper, because I also know that a lot of you will have had experience already with Midori paper, and so this might help sort of compare and contrast these different papers. And so yeah, we have the Midori sheets to compare to. I really can't talk today. I'm not sure what's going on. So let's start with the one that is up top, and I did want to have some white paper right there. So first up with the View Corona. Nice crispy crinkles. So this is also a 52 GSM paper, just like Tomoe River, and so it's not surprising that it has that same nice crinkly sound that Tomoe River paper has. And overall, I must say that the first impression is that this performed really well, especially for being 52 GSM paper. And as you might be able to tell in contrast with this white paper, it has a little bit of an eggshell color. But when compared with the Midori cream paper, I think it's a little lighter and a little less yellow. So again, maybe more eggshell than the creaminess of Midori cream. The thing that I noticed the most in all of this is how most of these ink swatches, as well as this sort of combining watercolors, made me feel like things show up a little duller than on Midori paper. So what I mean by that is, if you look at this swatch of Vinta's Sirena, which is a chromo shading ink, I just feel like it loses a lot of the interest in there. And similarly with the watercolor, it just looks a little dull and it almost dries to that chalky finish, and I would say that that's true for the ink swatches as well. So this is Pulsar Pulse by Colorverse, and that has a really nice red sheen, as you can see here, and that doesn't show up at all on this swatch. Well, maybe they're a little bit at the end. And if I'd only done one ink swatch, I would have maybe thought that it was, well, you put down less ink, but I do feel like it's safe to say that that's an overall impression that I get of the View Corona, having done not only the ink swatches, but also the watercolor. And maybe this is also good to point out here with this leaf where I took some Sailor ink and diluted it with water. It dried down like this, and this is what Midori paper does. So you can see how much more interesting this is and how the pigments separate more, whereas this is very homogeneous. So yeah, that's sort of my general impression. I would say that the line widths are true to nib size as to what I would expect in general, how my fountain pens behave. And then let's look at the back. The writing and the drawing, the watercolor, nothing shows through. Very, very solid, especially for 52 GSM paper. Now, these two stamp pads, this darker brown is a Sachihara stamp pad. It is almost bleeding through, I would say. It is very much, most of this darkness comes from ghosting and it being a darker color, whereas this is a lighter green. And this up top here is a Versamagic ink pad. And then the ink swatches, yeah, they're almost coming through. This Sailor Kokoroguma is coming through, but I might have been just very heavy-handed with that swatch. And then, unfortunately for me, also the dip nib drawing came through a little bit, so I would say for a creative journal, this might not be reliable enough for me personally, but I could totally see this if you're somebody who just writes in a journal or wants to use this as a planner or as a jot down notebook. I would think that that might be pretty solid there. And then also what I did with the View Corona, I printed some printables from Air & Wear out on the paper, and that turned out pretty nice. So now I have a way to print on thinner paper, which is nice to glue into a journal and not make it so thick. So that worked out well. However, I used one of these in a journal spread recently, and let's see if I can show that to you. This is Birmingham Pen Co.'s Root Cellar, and it feathered a little bit, which is interesting because the things that I tested on here weren't feathering. So now I'm not quite sure if that was a fluke with the Birmingham Pen Co. ink or with that specific piece of paper. If I had my hand on there with hand oils, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, I think overall very interesting, nice and thin. But for me personally, it wouldn't win out over my Midori cream paper. So that's View Corona. Let's move on to the Yu-Sari paper. And this is 95 GSM, so this is even thicker than Midori cream paper. So obviously you get almost no show through. I mean, that ink pad is about to come through, maybe, but I think, no, actually this is just heavy ghosting. So yeah, a really solid paper. I loved the writing experience. It is quite soft to write on, probably more coated than, for example, Midori paper is. And as you can see here, the black is so rich. I think it really makes colors pop and makes inks pop. Like, look at that. That Serena, beautiful. Then the Pulsar Pulse. We have that red sheening there coming through. The Sailor Kokoroguma looks amazing. Look at that red. So I think it really, yeah, brings out colors very well, brings out characteristics very well. Probably the best in all of the papers that I've tried. And again, it's so smooth to write on. The only unfortunate thing for me is that it's really strange to use with watercolor. So I don't know, these don't actually look that bad. I mean, this actually looks very decent. So does this, maybe a little chalky, but that might have just been my ink mixes, to be honest. But I did some further tests, and I think that this paper is just too coated for watercolor. If you want to do multiple layers, so here I tried layering different greens, you can see it gets all mushy or like muddled together. It picks up the color that was underneath, and I don't know. It is very strange. It's not a nice feeling. And then here I tried to have the colors blend into each other more, and it dries so quickly on this paper too that you just don't get really fun overlap or blending into each other with these colors. So that's really unfortunate. And if I may show you this older spread of mine, this is also Midori cream paper. Look how beautiful how beautiful watercolor dries on this paper. There's just so much texture, and the colors are bleeding well into each other. So yeah, I think Yu-Sari paper is just, I mean, it's probably not made for watercolor. It's made for bringing out your wonderful, beautiful, colorful inks, and it does that very, very well. So yeah, I think this is an absolute pleasure to write on. And then the other thing that I want to point out, yes, you get beautiful, rich inks. It also thickens up your ink line just slightly. I think you're gonna find that your pens write just a little thicker on this paper. Yeah, I think you can see that there quite well. So that is one thing to note, even if the watercolor isn't a selling point for you or determined for you, then yeah, it will slightly alter how your pens write. But beautiful swatching, so there's that. Okay, let's move on to the Wearingeul papers. Both of them are nicely white. So is the Yu-Sari paper, to be honest. I mean, that's pretty crispy. These are also both quite thick papers. So we have the Wearingeul Reservoir paper with 140 GSM, and then the impression paper has 200 GSM. So, you know, sturdy, sturdy, sturdy. I have a sheet of Midori Thick paper here, which is 141, which is about double the normal Midori thickness. And so the impression paper is even thicker than that. Yeah. The Reservoir paper has quite a bit of tooth to it. It almost feels like a drawing paper, something for colored pencils. And maybe you can see that here with the colored pencil, how nicely the pencils show up. And I really also liked how my little ink leaf showed up, how that dried. I feel like it looks really rich and still interesting, though. It doesn't swallow the different pigments or dyes, I guess. It's not real, that's not a pigment ink. Like compared to the View Corona again, like this is so much more interesting. Yeah, and the writing looks crisp. It was not my favorite to write on because it has that tooth, that almost like a drawing paper feel. I feel like it's a little scratchy with my pens, so not too keen on that. And although this showed up so nicely, and the watercolors showed up nicely, I feel like the swatches are, again, very uninteresting. You have no sheen on the Pulsar. The Sirena looks really uninteresting, and the Sailor Kokoroguma, I mean, you get some of that metallic, not metallic, but like it almost looks metallic sheen, but it's, yeah, I don't know, they look a little dull, and the Tombow Markers looked a bit streaky as well. So yeah, really a little weird paper, I must say. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what I'm gonna use this for, because it's not really nice to write on, and it's also not quite nice to swatch on, so I'm not quite sure. Like, for example, with the Review Corona, I could see myself using this as letter paper or printing on it, so I kind of still feel like I have a use for this. And with the Yu-Sari, for example, I could totally see myself also using this for letters, or using it for just ink swatches, or whenever I want really, really crispy drawings and want to scan them in. That would be wonderful on this paper and to use this paper for. But yeah, with the Reservoir paper, I'm not quite sure if I'm gonna figure something out to do with this. And then the impression paper is, again, very, very smooth, very coated. And comparing that to the Midori Thick paper, I would think that this is even more smooth, even more coated. Yeah. And then, so I think this is the best comparison. Again, the writing was fine. It feels very, very smooth. Here, the watercolor, yeah, shows up pretty good. Shows up well with the ink lines as well. The ink with the water, it looks okay. It's not as interesting as, for example, the Midori Thick paper, I would say. Yeah, Kakimori nib went well. The swatches are okay. Like here you get some of the chroma shading. Wearingeul Path looks kind of dull, and no glitter, but that might be my fault. And almost no sheen on the Pulse. There's a little bit right there, but where there's no sheen, the color looks a little dull, I would say. And the Sailor Kokoro Guma looks really, really strange. It looks more shiny on the camera than it is in real life. But the Kokoro Guma looks weird on the Midori Thick paper too, so there's that. But at least Path has a little bit more depth to it, and I would say that the Sirena shows up more with that chromo dual, whatever that, that interesting stuff. So yeah, I think here again, if you wanted something really thick, oh, and maybe I should show the backs. There's obviously nothing coming through on both of these because they're so thick. But the same goes for so this is the Reservoir paper. So we have the Wearingeul papers, the Impression, the Reservoir, and Midori Thick. Obviously nothing coming through. So these are really well. So for example, with the Midori Thick, this is fantastic if you want Midori paper for a sketchbook, but you find that the, what it is, like 70 or 80 GSM of the normal Midori cream paper gives you a little bit too much ghosting, and you get, you don't like so much showing through, then the Midori Thick is your ticket, I think. Yeah. So that is that. Did I miss anything? Oh yes, I do also had a sheet of Midori Cotton, and it's really interesting. I would say that this also is more textured than the normal Midori cream, but it writes more smoothly. Like, I find the writing experience can sometimes be a little dry on Midori cream paper, depending on your nib size and your just how wet your pen is and what ink you put in. But yeah, the Midori Cotton feels a lot more pleasant and overall more the same, like a nice writing experience. So I would actually prefer the Midori Cotton over the Midori cream paper. However, this is so weird because it has 20% cotton fibers in the paper. And that usually means that, for example, in watercolor paper, it means that it just does so well with anything wet, right? But look at the ink swatches. The Sirena looks so dull. path is okay. And then, yeah, watercolor is so-so, but then I went over it with the Tombow markers to make the dots, and they're all bleedy, which is strange. This was the only paper where Kakimori Dip Nip with the Sailor Afternoon Tea ink feathered in the drawing. The only paper. It's so strange. Like, what? Why? And then, yeah, this is the back. And here, let me put a sheet on the back there. The Kokoro Guma came through. The Pulse came through. The Sachihara ink pat is... No, that's just ghosting. And then it's starting to come through on the Dip Nip drawing right there. So yeah, that's really unfortunate because, again, in terms of writing on it, I would prefer it to my general Midori cream, but it's just a little not quite dependable enough for my taste, if that makes sense. So, to wrap this up, and I do hope this was helpful, let me know if you have any questions or things that you want me to go further into. But my takeaway from all of this, from all this paper testing, is that Midori paper is just still my favorite. There's just nothing quite like how dependable this paper is, how well it shows up inks as well as watercolor, and how interesting watercolor and inks dry on this paper. And yeah, it just doesn't seem to shy away from any mediums. Not that the paper is picking the mediums, but yeah, I just think that I don't know if I can do better than this. It does exactly what I want paper to do, which is to show off inks, not feather, show up watercolors nicely, that they dry nicely, and I can work in layers and have colors bleed into each other. It holds up to stamp inks, and I personally have a preference to cream paper, so there's that. So far I've always been using the Midori cream just for my general creative journaling, and then the Thick I have as a sketchbook if I want to make drawings that I want to scan, and just simply because the back doesn't show through as much. That's a little nicer for some nicer sketching. But I do like Midori, the regular Midori cream also for sketching. But yeah, kind of sad about the Midori Cotton. I have written letters on Midori Cotton paper before, so that's really nice. So, but I wouldn't go out of my way to buy any more of it. I just had some leftover pieces. I'm glad I tried these ones out, and I'm thinking that the Wearingeul Impressions I'm gonna have just as a playbook. I created this to figure out what inks I wanted to ink up for fall. So this was quite fun to do in this book. So this is gonna be nice for that kind of stuff, I think. And then, like I was saying, the Yu-Sari, I think I'm gonna be using if I want some nice, really rich ink drawings for scanning. And then View Corona, I might play more around with that as letter paper and for printing on. So yeah, not sure what to do with the Reservoir paper, as I mentioned, I guess. Let me know which ones of these you have tried before. What is your go-to paper that meets all your paper needs? And yeah, alrighty. Thanks so much for sharing this time with me, and until next time, happy journaling!